Just because she was a black woman in an expensive suit, she was immediately confronted by Officer Bishop, who shoved his baton in her face and interrogated each of her belongings like he was frisking a thief. In the middle of the park, he shouted so loud that birds scattered, then suddenly slapped her without hesitation. Blood appeared at the corner of her mouth, yet he smirked as if violence was a badge given right. He thought he had just put a cocky girl in her place, until she pulled out a hexagonal FBI badge. He didn't just assault someone. He had just attacked a federal agent. Where you live, who holds the power? The late afternoon sun glazed over the park with a soft, amber warmth. Trees stood like silent witnesses to the winding footpaths, their leaves whispering gently in the breeze. Children's laughter floated in the air, not loud, just enough to suggest that life, for the moment, was in rhythm. Joggers paced by with headphones in, mothers pushed strollers, and old men played chess near the far bench beneath the oak tree. Peace hung low, not heavy, just settled, as if the park had exhaled. Near one tree, where the roots cracked through the soil and the grass gave way to packed dirt, a woman bent down slowly, her back to the crowd, knees gracefully angled. Her black wool coat didn't wrinkle. It curved with her spine, still crisp. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't rummaging. She simply reached deliberately for a handbag that had somehow slipped beneath the lip of a gnarly root. One hand steadied her against the trunk. The other closed gently around the handle of the bag. There was no rush, no sound. Then a voice, flat, clipped, just a shade too firm, cut through the air. "Ma'am," not loud, not angry, but there was no warmth in it either. A neutral tone meant to sound official, but the kind of official that left no room for interpretation. The woman didn't rise. Her head remained bowed. Her posture is unchanged. Her grip on the bag handle tightened. 15 feet away, Officer Bishop paused. He didn't yell, didn't shout. He simply shifted the weight of his belt and let one finger rest, casual but clear, on the arch of his sidearm. The movement was subtle, practiced, meant to communicate without words. "I have the authority, and I can escalate this." He stepped closer, boots pressing into the dirt with quiet certainty. The laughter of a nearby child cracked, broke, and faded. A little boy who had been spinning in dizzy circles suddenly stopped and stared. His mother, noticing, reached for his hand and squeezed, whispering something, but the boy didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the officer's back. The woman didn't speak. She didn't even lift her face. But something about her, the deliberate stillness, the way her fingers coiled tighter around the leather strap, shifted the air. Bishop noticed it. He wasn't sure why it unsettled him, but it did. Not defiance, not fear, just control. A control too measured, too exact. Her knuckles paled. Veins stood out, taut like wires under her skin. "Is everything all right with the bag?" Bishop asked the question, thinly veiled. He stepped forward again. 3 paces now. Still, she didn't speak. Her breathing was audible now, slow, deep, the kind that came not from fatigue, but from someone counting something, grounding herself in silence. The kind of breathing you learn from practice. A couple approached from the east side of the path, laughing softly between themselves. Then they saw the scene. One woman crouched beside a tree, one officer advancing slowly, his hand still brushing the curve of his holster. Their conversation died mid-sentence. Without meaning to, they slowed, not stopped, but their pace matched the tension, like people entering a room where someone's just shouted. The man glanced at the woman beside him. She didn't look back. They walked in step, cautious. "I asked if everything was all right," Bishop said again, louder this time, not yelling, but closer now. His shadow crept across the dirt and brushed the woman's heel. The woman's head lifted, but only slightly. Not enough to show her face, just enough to acknowledge sound. Then, carefully, she rose. One hand still on the bag. The other was brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. Her posture was immaculate, not rehearsed, innate, as if she had been raised not to flinch, not to stoop even when bending. Bishop stopped. He hadn't expected her to be tall, not towering, but tall in the way presence can be, a kind of vertical silence. Her coat fell perfectly to her knees, her heels didn't scuff, she still hadn't spoken, and that silence, more than any protest, began to crack something invisible in the space between them. He gestured toward her handbag, nodding. "You dropped it?" She looked at him now. It wasn't a stare. It was an examination. Her eyes moved once over his face, 1, 2 seconds at most, and landed on his own eyes with a quiet finality that made him feel like a document being signed. She said nothing. Her fingers stayed tight around the bag strap. Bishop's hand twitched, just slightly. It left the gun belt and fell to his side. The boy nearby whimpered. His mother picked him up and turned away. The couple had stopped walking entirely. Somewhere a bird screeched once and took off. The flutter of wings disrupted the branches. But no one looked up. "Ma'am," Bishop said again, the syllables drier now, pushed between his teeth. "I'm going to need you to answer me." But she didn't move. Her body faced him now, her feet firmly planted, one heel on the dirt, one slightly turned out, a dancer's stance. Stable, silent, her eyes never blinked. Bishop stepped forward again. Too close now, the kind of distance that law enforcement called command space. He stood within a foot of her, close enough to assert, close enough to intimidate, and yet she didn't shrink, didn't flinch, didn't react at all. Her mouth stayed closed, her nostrils barely flared. Her fingers, though, those betrayed the calm, still white, still clenched. One blue vein twitched along her wrist like a wire straining under tension. A breeze stirred again, leaves rustled, but no one moved. Bishop tilted his head slightly, not sure why this felt off. Not wrong, just misaligned. Like playing a familiar game, but the rules had shifted mid. He looked down at the bag. "Can I see some ID?" he asked. Not a demand, a test. She didn't answer. His jaw flexed. "You hear me?" She nodded, but still no words. "Ma'am, this doesn't have to become a problem," Bishop warned, and now the phrase sounded tired. He'd used it before, too many times. But here, it rang hollow, powerless. The woman slowly adjusted the bag on her wrist. Still no ID. Still no response. The silence was no longer empty. It was heavy now, pressed down on Bishop's chest, on his voice, on the scene. The woman was not resisting. She was enduring, and that difference cut sharper than protest ever could. Behind them, a man watching from the bench stood slowly, pulled out his phone. Bishop noticed. The air changed again. He stepped back, barely a shuffle. The woman's eyes followed the movement. Not triumphant, not mocking, just clear. The moment held. A tree branch creaked overhead. The couple walked on. The boy stopped crying. But nothing returned to normal, because whatever had started here, it wasn't over, and nothing about it had ever been normal. The quiet did not last. It never does, not when ego is bruised in the uniform of unchecked power. Bishop shifted his stance again, but this time it was not with the weight of authority. It was with something smaller, something more insecure. The silence between them had become too much. Her eyes hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't even flinched, and that unnerved him more than if she'd shouted. Her composure was not just disobedience, it was an indictment. So he struck back, not with fists, but with words sharp enough to leave cuts in places no body cam could see. He tapped the nightstick once against his thigh, not hard, just enough to make the leather creak, then casually raised it and pointed at her handbag, its emblem facing the world like a challenge. "Is that real?" he asked, his voice carrying that kind of smirk only years of unchecked contempt could sharpen. "Looks like the kind of thing you'd see behind glass, not under a tree." She didn't move. Her fingers remained wrapped around the strap, her posture still upright, effortless, regal even. He narrowed his eyes. "What I mean is," and now the voice came colder, clipped, hissed between clenched teeth as though every syllable was a shot in a firing line. "You got that kind of cash? Dressed like that, in this neighborhood?" He tilted his head slightly, the mock surprise in his tone thick enough to choke on. "Did I miss the memo where Gucci started giving handouts?" No answer, not a breath wasted on the bait, just that same unblinking stare. Her silence became mirror and fire both, reflecting every inch of who he was and burning through the thin paper of his performance. It wasn't just her silence, it was her existence. Her being there, unmoved, unbent, unafraid. That burned him more than a riot. He jabbed the nightstick forward, not violently, but with that calculated arrogance of someone who believed their badge came with immunity. The tip stopped inches from the bag's logo. "Tell me," he sneered, "which boyfriend paid for that? Or should I say, clients?" The final word dropped like a stone in a still pond. Not shouted, just sharpened, honed, and carved from decades of systemic sneer. Somewhere nearby, a bird took off. Another flurry of wings beat against branches. The boy, who had been cradled by his mother, now turned fully around in her arms to watch. And just then a figure moved. A woman, elderly, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the breeze. She wasn't near enough to intervene, not near enough to protect, but she was close enough to see, and she was holding a phone. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the screen. The camera app opened slowly, uncertainly, her index finger tapping to focus. Her hand was shaking, not from cold, but from recognition. She had seen something like this before, maybe in the 60s, maybe last year, maybe yesterday. Bishop noticed her, and it only fed his performance. He didn't step back. Instead, he raised his voice. Not a yell, not yet, but louder than necessary, the kind of volume that pretends to inform but is meant to dominate. "Ma'am, I'm asking you a question," he barked, his voice ringing across the clearing and bouncing off the concrete. "Where'd you get that? And don't give me any of that online shopping bull. People like you don't just walk around with bags like that unless something smells funny." The bag did not move. Her hand gripped tighter, only slightly, and her thumb rubbed once along the edge of the strap, a movement so small it could have been mistaken for a nervous twitch. But it wasn't. It was a mark, a claim, her way of saying, "This is mine, earned, chosen, not owed." Bishop's eyes darted between her and the phone, pointed toward them. His jaw ticked. His temple flinched, and suddenly his voice exploded. Not in rage, but in volume, artificial and excessive, a theater of intimidation. "I'm talking to you," he roared, the bark slicing the air like a blade. The trees above shook as startled birds burst from the branches, wings flapping violently, their calls high and sharp, fleeing what they couldn't name but knew to escape. His voice didn't just fill the space. It tore through it, but she didn't move. Not even a blink, not even a breath out of place. The noise passed through her like wind through stone. Her gaze remained on his, level and lethal, not pleading, not afraid, just present. He hated it. He hated it with the kind of hatred that doesn't come from logic or reason, but from the deep, rotting pit of entitlement being challenged. In that gaze he saw judgment he couldn't disprove. In her silence he heard a verdict he couldn't appeal. The elderly woman with the phone took a step back. Breath caught in her throat, but the phone remained steady now, no longer trembling. She had seen what she needed. Bishop turned halfway toward her, realized the camera was still rolling, and turned back quickly, his voice now forced into civility, but still brimming with contempt. "Ma'am, I'm asking for identification," he snapped, each word now cutting rather than commanding. "You want to be difficult? That's on you." The woman still said nothing. Not a flicker of expression passed across her face, but the weight of her stare deepened, and with it the earth seemed to hold its breath. Every second she didn't speak was a scalpel dissecting his authority, slicing through the performance, peeling back the layers of polished uniform and exposing the trembling boy beneath, who needed to shout at someone to feel tall. And just then something almost imperceptible shifted. Bishop's voice faltered for a beat, his lips parted, but no words followed, and in that hesitation she breathed in once, slow and deep, not ragged, not shaky, but deliberate, the breath of someone who refused to be moved by noise. A sound that didn't come from panic, but preparation. He saw it. He knew that breath wasn't surrender. It was a signal. And for the first time, though he didn't know why, Officer Bishop felt like the one being watched. Not by her, by the moment itself. Something vast, cold, and unrelenting had awakened in the air around them, and it was not on his side. The weight of her silence had become too much for him to bear. So he did what weak men in borrowed uniforms always do when their words fail. He reached. No warning, no permission, no pause. Bishop moved with the desperate authority of someone who needed to prove a point more than preserve protocol. His hand shot forward, the leather of his gloves creaking softly as he gripped the zipper of her handbag and yanked it open, the metal teeth parting like a threat disguised as curiosity. The moment cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, but surgically. Her posture didn't shift, but her hand moved. Not fast, not violent, just certain. It landed gently, with precision on his wrist, fingers firm but not shaking. He stopped mid-mesmer, eyes flicking to where her skin touched his, surprised not by the contact but by the steadiness of it. "You just violated federal law," she said, the words barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to slice through bone. Her voice didn't tremble, it didn't rise, it didn't ask for anything. It cold, clean, lethal in its calm. Her grip held him there, not by force but by certainty. A murmur stirred behind them. Someone, somewhere close enough to hear, repeated her words, first soft, then louder. "He just broke federal law." Like dropping a stone into still water, it rippled. The crowd's attention, already simmering, sharpened. Eyes that had watched in silence now darted to Bishop's hand, still hovering near the mouth of her bag. He blinked, a single pulse of confusion crossing his face, and looked down, only to see something metallic, small, strangely shaped, tumbling free from the bag's loosened zipper. It spun once in the air before hitting the dirt with a soft thud, catching the sunlight like a shard of heat. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't money. It wasn't anything he recognized immediately, but it gleamed with the wrong kind of authority, one that didn't belong to him. Hexagonal, clean, polished, and unmistakably federal. For a fraction of a second, he didn't understand what it was. For another fraction, he understood too much. The crowd moved as if inhaling all at once. A child near the edge of the commotion, small, maybe 6 years old, trotted forward before any adult could stop him, curiosity unburdened by fear. He picked up the object, eyes squinting at its shape, and turned to his mother, hand outstretched. She looked down, expecting a rock, maybe a toy, maybe a coin, but not that. Her face paled instantly. The blood drained from her cheeks like a retreating tide. She snatched the object from her child's hand and held it close, her eyes locking on the seal, the number, the authority embedded into the metal. "Jesus," she whispered. Bishop heard her. He heard all of it. He saw it too, the wave rolling toward him, not of violence, not yet, but of awareness, of revelation, and he felt something he hadn't in years, miscalculation. "That's yours?" he asked, still trying to sound in control, still pretending the power dynamic hadn't shifted. But the question rang hollow. It wasn't his voice anymore. It was desperation in disguise. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The crowd had seen the badge, and worse for him, they had heard her. Her hand left his wrist, slowly, deliberately, as if releasing a cord pulled tight. He stepped back reflexively, as if he'd just touched something hot. She didn't chase the distance. She stood still, letting the space between them become proof of his retreat. The murmurs swelled now, voices overlapping, some asking questions, others already forming conclusions. A woman near the back pulled out her phone and zoomed in. A man further left called out to someone nearby. Bishop turned to look, just for a second, and in that second, the control was gone. Not the uniform, not the gun, not the authority he clung to like a relic. The control, the moment, gone. And she still hadn't said another word. Her face was calm, her breathing level. But her eyes were the thing that undid him. Not angry, not smug, just knowing. He opened his mouth to speak again, to demand, to assert, to spin it back into his favor, but the words got stuck, because no training manual prepares you for touching the wrong badge, not in front of 50 witnesses, not when your ignorance is your undoing. He tried again. "I didn't see that," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "I didn't." "But you did," she cut in, her voice low but undeniable, the kind of voice that turns facts into consequences. "And they saw you." She didn't point to the crowd. She didn't need to. The phones pointed themselves. The eyes didn't waver. The weight of their witness pressed down harder than any chain of command. Bishop's hand dropped from the bag, limp now, unsure of its next move. He took another step back. His foot caught slightly on a root, forcing him to steady himself. The stumble wasn't big, but it was visible, and it was enough. Enough to show the shift, enough to expose the man behind the badge, enough to tell every soul in that park that power had just changed hands, and it hadn't required a single shout. Power never slips quietly from weak hands. It fights, it thrashes, and when it feels itself slipping, it lunges for the illusion of control with every last shred of force. Bishop's eyes, once calculating, were now erratic, his breathing shallow, pulse rising, body stiffening in the way men do when authority deserts them, and all they are left with is skin and ego. He was no longer the one holding the gate. He was the one reacting to it. And he hated that. He hated that more than anything else. The badge gleamed faintly on the ground. Still in the hand of the pale-faced mother, the metal catching a flicker of sunlight as if it, too, was watching. The woman in front of him remained still, statuesque, unbending. Her lip barely curled, not in contempt, but in clarity. That look, subtle as breath, said everything. You are not above what's coming. It broke him, not with noise, not with fury, but with quiet confirmation that this moment would outlive him, and not in the way he thought he deserved. He asked nothing more. No command left his lips. No protocol. No attempt at false civility. What happened next wasn't strategy. It wasn't a mistake. It was Bishop reverting to the only weapon some men know when their voice isn't enough: his open hand. The slap came fast, instinctive, unfiltered. A flat arc of flesh cutting through distance, crossing the final inch with a thud that cracked against her face and echoed down the spines of everyone watching. The sound wasn't cinematic. It was raw, wet, human. Her head jerked to the side, not violently, but just enough to register that she had been struck. The corner of her mouth split. A single thread of blood slipped down past her chin, caught briefly in the collar of her coat, then vanished beneath the wool. Her eyes, they didn't change, not once. They remained locked on his, unblinking, untouched by shock, by pain, by shame. They saw through him. And that was the part he couldn't handle. A young man near the edge of the crowd yelled out, the urgency in his voice cracking with adrenaline. Get that angle, zoom in, don't miss that. Record his name, get his badge. His voice was soon swallowed by a tidal wave of other phones raising higher, lenses focusing, mouths open in disbelief. And still she stood, not stumbling, not raising a hand to her face. Only the thin line of red, now darkening, betrayed that anything had happened at all. The badge, still clutched in the mother's hand, caught another beam of sunlight, this time bouncing directly toward a bystander's phone, creating an accidental flash of light that framed the moment like an omen. One woman in the crowd, older, wrapped in a floral scarf, broke into quiet sobs. Not from the violence itself, but from the inevitability of it, as if she had seen this before, lived this before, and still wasn't ready for the sound of it returning. Bishop's hand trembled slightly at his side, not from regret, but from the dawning awareness of what he had just done, and who had seen it. Not just her, not just the crowd, but the record, the memory, the permanence. This would not be tucked into a report or blurred by bureaucracy. This had angles. This had audio. This had blood. He looked at her again, expecting something. A flinch, a shout, a plea, but she gave him nothing, just those eyes, those unwavering, silent eyes, the kind of stare that doesn't ask you to answer, it makes you answer to yourself. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry, throat tight, but the air around him had already turned. The crowd was no longer curious. They were no longer passive. They were present, witnesses. Each face is a testament. Each phone is a confession recorder, and at the center of it all, her, standing, silent, strong, bloodied but not broken, shamed but not silenced. Bishop took a step back, then another. It was instinct again, but not defensive. Retracting, he was retreating, and the moment, frozen in time through 100 lenses, had just declared its verdict. The echo of the slap hadn't finished reverberating through the park when the first stream went live. There was no dramatic announcement, no special editing, no filter, just a shaking hand, a phone's front-facing camera flipping toward the scene, and a voice half-stunned, half-electrified, whispering too loud, "Yo, yo, are we seeing this? Is she FBI?" The question didn't hang in the air. It detonated, because even before it had a real answer, it had attention. In the span of seconds, hundreds joined the stream, then thousands. The caption read only, "Cop just hit a black woman. She said he broke federal law." No hashtags, no explanation. But it didn't need either. The image said everything. The woman stood in place, unmoved, with a cut on her lip and a badge still gleaming in a stranger's hand like divine evidence. Behind her, Bishop was already unraveling, his movements no longer precise, his expression now flickering with that toxic mix of panic and pride. His hands twitched, his feet shifted. He glanced once at the camera, then away. Too fast. The moment was captured from every angle, some high, some low, some shaky with adrenaline. Each device became its lens of justice, each screen its tribunal. The air felt different now. Not thick with violence, but alive with exposure. What had once been a power play was now evident in motion. Another voice, distant but clear, rang out from across the lawn. "Hey, what's happening? Stop that now!" The shout didn't stop the moment. It amplified it. People turned, more phones came out, and suddenly what had been a semicircle of silent onlookers became a swelling perimeter of public scrutiny. The crowd wasn't just present, they were now participants, each one pressing record, framing the scene, narrating not just what was happening, but what it meant. "He hit her, straight up, no warning." Someone muttered behind their camera, "This ain't a warning shot. This is real." Bishop tried to assert control again, barked an order, "Step back, all of you," but his voice cracked at the edges, hollow, no longer amplified by authority, just swallowed by static. He reached for his radio, fumbled with the strap, and cursed under his breath. One of the phones caught it, live, in high definition. "He's shaking," the live streamer whispered. "He knows." And he did. He knew it the way a man knows when the room has turned, when the gun isn't in his holster anymore but aimed at him from 100 digital barrels. Each lens that had once been used to capture birthday parties or skate tricks was now repurposed into a witness stand. There was no perimeter of safety, no off switch, just him and the moment he couldn't erase. Somewhere near the edge of the crowd, an old man spoke, low enough that only the mic of a nearby phone caught him. "It's another Rodney King," he said, and though the words were soft, they traveled with the gravity of memory. He wasn't angry, he was exhausted. Behind that name lived an entire history of bruises with no apologies, of footage with no consequence. But this time, maybe, this time, someone had a badge of her own. The comments on the live streams swelled. Names poured in. Screenshots were taken. One username posted the officer's name, scraped from a zoomed-in badge frame, Bishop. Another followed. "Look him up. Look up his record." A flood of viewers didn't ask questions. They searched. Within minutes, posts were circulating. Alleged past complaints, possible matches to previous incidents, blurry mugshots of protesters from years back, where Bishop's face hovered in the background. "That's him. He's done this before. This ain't new." The algorithms responded like bloodhounds. Clips started to spread across platforms. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. No context needed. Just the slap, the stare, the badge, and the silence. 4 seconds long. 15 seconds. Loops of it. Slow motion. Rewinds, zoom-ins. It wasn't just a video, it was an indictment gone viral. Bishop was now not just a name, but a hashtag. Not just a man, but a symbol of what everyone feared and too many had experienced. He knew it, too. His movements became less deliberate. His posture sagged slightly, as if the uniform suddenly weighed too much. He looked around, not for backup, but for exits, for quiet. But there was none. Each step he took triggered another angle, another voice, another caption. Watch him walk now. He's done. This is the face of fear in uniform. Yet through it all, the woman didn't move. Her hands never trembled. Her blood never smudged. She didn't explain. She didn't justify. She didn't perform. She stood as still as history, and just as damning. The only movement from her came when she looked, once, slowly, toward a nearby phone, not with anger, not with appeal, but with the solemn acknowledgement that it was already too late to hide. The world had seen, and it would not be unseen. The moment had been captured, dissected, and duplicated into the bloodstream of the internet, where nothing dies quietly. Bishop's voice cracked again. Turn those off, but his shout felt like a man screaming at the tide. Power was no longer his. The badge still glimmered faintly from the hand of a mother in the front row. Behind her, her child stared, wide-eyed, holding tightly to her coat. The child had no words, just silence, like her, like the beginning of change, or the end of denial. The silence that followed wasn't absence, it was pressure. A silence that didn't fall but rose, swelled, pressed down like the weight of truth settling over every breath. Bishop stood frozen, not from protocol, not from training, but from the simple realization that whatever performance he had been putting on was now over. His words had collapsed, his movements betrayed him, and in front of him she moved, not fast, not with vengeance, but with intent so precise it felt holy. She stepped once toward the badge on the ground, her shoes brushing through the dirt without a sound, the world around her holding its breath. The cut on her lip had dried now, the blood darkening into a single thread, but her spine was straight, her poise untouchable. She bent, not like before, not as someone retrieving something lost, but as one reclaiming something that was always hers. Her fingers curled around the edges of the badge, lifting it with reverence, not for ceremony, but for memory. The sunlight, filtered through the branches above, struck the badge as she rose, the rays cascading off the polished metal like a spotlight summoned by silence itself. It wasn't dramatic, it was inevitable. A beam broke through the tangle of leaves, found the badge, then bounced directly into Bishop's face. He flinched, not at her, not at the badge, but at the light, as if truth had decided to become visible, as if the universe had conspired to cast him, in this exact second, not as the enforcer, but as the exposed. His hand recoiled from his side, a reflex not of defense, but of shame, as though he'd reached out and touched something electric. Her eyes were already on him, not wide, not furious, just fixed, measured. She didn't raise the badge high like a shield. She held it level, in front of her chest, right hand steady, thumb anchored across the engraved seal. The crowd leaned forward, not physically, but emotionally, as though every phone, every breath, every thought had curved toward this axis. She spoke, not loud, not whispered, a tone designed to land exactly where it needed to land, in the spine. "Special Agent," she said. A pause. The words hung for half a heartbeat. "Department of Justice." She didn't shout, she didn't gesture, but the words cracked the air with the gravity of a gavel. Someone in the crowd gasped audibly. A sharp intake like the sky had opened. Another voice, off to the left, half whispered it again. DOJ. Bishop's mouth parted. His eyes darted to the badge, to her face, to the crowd again. Every muscle in his body tensed, then failed. His arms lowered. His shoulders dropped, and for the first time in the entire confrontation, he looked like a man who had forgotten what side of the law he was supposed to be on. He tried to speak, his lips moved, nothing came out. Far across the lawn, behind the outermost edge of the swelling crowd, a new figure appeared. Dark suit, no badge shown, phone in hand, recording. The expression is unreadable. He didn't wave, didn't call out, he didn't have to. The camera in his hand wasn't pointed at the crowd, it was locked on Bishop. His mere presence changed the air again. The park, once a crime scene, was now a courtroom. Not one built of marble and law, but of exposure and momentum. Bishop shifted on his heels. He opened his mouth again, forced words out this time. "I didn't know, she didn't identify. The excuses tripped over themselves, gasping for structure, trying to rebuild a tower that had already collapsed. She didn't answer him. She didn't need to. Her badge said everything. The blood on her lip said the rest. Around them, the world had gone quieter. Not because people weren't talking, but because the tone had changed. People were no longer asking what's happening. They were saying, "We saw it. We caught it. We know." A child's voice near the front of the crowd asked a question, not to anyone, just out loud. "She's the police?" The mother answered without looking down. "She's more than that." The badge was still gleaming, still aimed like a mirror into Bishop's face. He couldn't escape it, because it wasn't being waved. It was simply there, solid, final, irrefutable. It reminded him not just of what he had touched, but of what he had violated. Not just a woman, not just a citizen, but a federal agent. And behind that agent stood an institution. Behind that institution stood accountability. Behind that accountability stood thousands of eyes that were not blinking. Bishop stepped back, one foot first, then the other. He didn't turn to walk away. He couldn't. Turning would mean admitting it was over. He tried to stand his ground, but the ground was no longer his. It belonged to the badge, to the voice that had said 8 words and shifted the tectonic plates beneath his career. He looked down once more at her hand, at the badge. The sunlight shifted again, another beam catching the surface, flashing in his pupils, and in that light, every camera caught it, his eyes watering, not from pain, not from dust, from the simple, raw recognition he had been caught by something he didn't understand, and there would be no unseeing it. His voice was gone, not taken, dismantled. Bishop stood there, throat dry, lips parted, with nothing coherent finding its way out. The badge still gleamed in her hand, and the crowd didn't blink. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't shaking, but every word, every breath, every second of her stillness now carried the full weight of law. She was no longer just a presence. She was a veteran, walking, breathing, bloodied and calm. Bishop looked around like a man seeking a foothold in a world that no longer obeyed him. But the world had shifted. Permanently. A murmur rose through the air, not shock anymore, not disbelief, recognition. A new layer of awareness settled over the crowd like a tide that had been building beneath their feet without them noticing. They weren't just witnesses now, they were witnesses to justice recalibrating itself in real time. The badge had spoken, her eyes had confirmed it, and Bishop had nothing left to hide behind. No voice to shout with, no command to issue. Just air, just fear. She raised her phone. No flourish, no drama. Just precision. The screen lit up with her fingertip, the camera lens facing him. She held it steady, the way a courtroom holds silence before a sentence. "You are now under federal observation," she said. Her tone didn't climb, it descended, cool, smooth, absolute. "Your conduct has triggered immediate jurisdictional oversight." The words struck like hammer blows, not loud, but heavy, each one sinking deeper than any punch. Bishop blinked. His tongue moved, trying to form something, anything, explanation, denial, command, but all he managed was, I didn't mean." She didn't. Then he reached. Reflex, panic, the muscle memory of a man who thought his radio could still rescue him, but as his hand neared the comm device strapped across his chest, a second hand closed around his wrist, clean, quick, definitive. It belonged to a young officer who had just arrived, still breathless from running. Uniform crisp, eyes sharp. The moment his gaze landed on the badge, his posture changed. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't questioned. He'd seen the seal and done what training couldn't teach. Stood down. "Sir," the young officer said, voice tight but controlled. "Don't move." Bishop froze, shocked by the words, even more by who they came from. His eyes snapped toward the younger man, half his age, half his rank, but the look he found there wasn't deference. It was a warning. Behind them, the crowd surged with a new energy, not wild, not chaotic, but unified. A chant didn't start. Something quieter did. A boy's voice, maybe 7 or 8, asked the question no adult dared to say aloud. "Can you hit an FBI agent?" The father beside him, tall, tired, silent for most of the ordeal, bent down, voice tight with fury, he hadn't released until now. You can't even raise your voice to one. That sentence made its way into 3 separate phone recordings. Within minutes, it would be quoted on captions, copied into tweets, and printed in bold on a dozen protest signs. Bishop stood still, not restrained, contained, not by handcuffs, not yet, by reality. She lowered her phone slowly, screen still lit, recording. "You're being documented," she said softly, but each syllable found its mark like a scalpel. "Everything from this point forward is a federal record. Choose what you want your legacy to be." He opened his mouth again. Nothing came out. The young officer released his wrist, but didn't move back. The tension in his stance remained. A soldier guarding not a person, but a truth. The kind of truth you don't let walk away without answering. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. This wasn't a win. This was a reckoning. Silent, systemic, and it was just beginning. She didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The law had been spoken, not in codes, not in threats, but in a tone that could only come from someone who had carried too many secrets for too long and had finally decided the world deserved the truth. Bishop didn't run. He didn't collapse. He just stood there, trembling slightly, eyes wide, shoulders falling, the entire construct of his identity now cracking in the light of what he had struck. Not just a woman, not just a citizen, a symbol of a system larger than him, now turning to look directly at his name. The crowd no longer waited for an explanation. They waited for closure. For resolution not in words, but in process. She lowered the phone she had used to record, turned it once in her palm, then slid it back into the inner pocket of her blazer with the same precision she had retrieved the badge. There was no anger in her movements, no triumph, only control. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't seek attention. She reached into her coat and retrieved a slim black notepad, the kind used by those who document not stories but facts. Her pen clicked once, no hesitation. She looked directly at Bishop, her expression unchanged, her presence now almost surgical. "State your name," she said. The words were level, flat, cut clean of any emotional excess. Bishop's mouth parted again, unsure whether to plead or resist, but neither instinct found footing. The silence around him was no longer just social, it was procedural. He looked at the young officer still standing beside him, who gave no nod, no help, just presence. Bishop finally swallowed hard and said, "Officer Kenneth Bishop." Her pen moved, one line, neat, precise. "Badge number?" she asked. There was a pause, longer than necessary, a flicker of resistance, but it died fast. 451 Delta 2, he said, quieter than before. She repeated it softly under her breath as she wrote, anchoring each digit onto paper like a stone in concrete. Her handwriting was sharp, uniform, and untouched by emotion. She turned slightly, shielding the notepad from the wind, and reached into the same pocket as before, this time pulling out a secure device. Not a standard-issue radio, not public police tech. This one was smaller, sleek, unmistakably federal. She pressed her thumb against the biometric pad, and a green light blinked once. She raised it to her mouth, calm, cold, and said, "Activate protocol. Open file 58C1. The response came almost instantly. A soft electronic ping, followed by a voice from the other end. No introduction, no confusion, just a simple confirmation. 13 minutes recorded, audio and visual. Bishop blinked. His jaw clenched. He turned halfway to the side, instinct pulling him away, but there was nowhere left to go. Every step now would be traced. Every breath is now catalogued. He tried to speak again, perhaps to explain, to dilute the clarity of what had just been made official, but she was already writing again, still on the same notepad, still in the same unwavering rhythm. This wasn't retribution, it was a process. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a case file being born. She didn't look at him as she wrote. She didn't need to. He had been reduced to details, data, a subject under review. She finished the line, tore the page carefully, folded it once, and slipped it into a narrow envelope marked DOJ Internal. The motion wasn't rushed. It was mechanical, learned, and executed with a kind of poise that made even the smallest act feel like judgment. Bishop watched the envelope disappear into her coat, his own hands frozen at his sides. His fingers twitched but didn't move. He had no weapon to reach for anymore, not legally, not symbolically. She raised her eyes to meet his one more time. The cut on her lip had dried further now. The badge in her coat cast a muted reflection of the tree. "This will be filed tonight," she said, calm as a clock. "You'll receive notice within 24 hours. Until then, any attempt to alter, delete, or interfere with documentation will be considered obstruction at the federal level." Her voice didn't rise, but the word obstruction hit him like an echo chamber collapsing. It was no longer about what he had done. It was about how he would be remembered, doing it. A man in uniform, now catalogued like a fingerprint. She didn't offer him a chance to respond. She turned slightly toward the crowd and nodded once at the younger officer. He stepped forward without hesitation. No handcuffs yet, just presence, just shadow. Bishop remained where he was, his eyes scanning the crowd as if someone might save him, speak for him, translate the panic he couldn't articulate. But the crowd wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. The notepad, the envelope, the badge, and they saw something even more terrifying to men like him than anger. They saw order, and order didn't flinch. She didn't need to say anything else. The system had heard her. The paperwork had begun, and the chain of command was now infected with accountability. But the park wasn't the only courtroom. Somewhere between the time she slipped the envelope into her coat and the last breath of silence folded over the crowd, the story leapt off the ground and into the bloodstream of the internet. The first post came 37 seconds after she said, "Obstruction." It was a short clip. 11 seconds, blurry, grainy, but unmistakable. Bishop's hand mid-strike, her face unmoving, the badge, the silence. The caption read, "He hit an FBI agent." Let that sink in. It hit hard. The video spread faster than fire and dry wind, carried by algorithms that didn't care about nuance, fueled by outrage that didn't need context. By the time the clip reached 1.2 million views, 43 minutes after upload, the hashtag had begun to rise. Not subtle, not slow. It roared onto the trending list like a protest chant written in code. Beat her like he owns the law. Good? No one knew where it started, but everyone knew what it meant. Screens lit up around the country, around the world. Reposts, stitches, duets, reactions. People didn't ask what happened, they showed what happened. Frame by frame, overlays, zooms. Text on screen. Circles were drawn around Bishop's face. The blood on her lip. The badge. The bag. Her eyes. The angles were different, but the verdict was unanimous. "If she's FBI and he still hit her," one caption read, "what chance do the rest of us have?" The comment was repeated over and over, screen captured and shared, posted under every clip, echoed in live streams and newscasts alike. Local news picked it up first, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The station across town aired the footage under a breaking banner. DOJ agent assaulted in public park. Caught on camera. They didn't say her name. They didn't need to. Her face was enough. One frame. Blood on the lip, badge in hand, eyes forward. That one image became the thumbnail of a movement. You couldn't scroll without seeing her. Not angry, not broken. Just standing, just looking, like a monument, the kind that made men nervous. Activist groups responded within the hour. The Coalition for Civil Oversight released a statement calling the incident a microcosm of structural aggression. A larger organization, the National Justice Initiative, called it a systemic reenactment of centuries-old sanctioned pursuit. One post from a verified account read simply, "Her silence is louder than every press conference this year." It was reposted 300,000 times. Celebrities, politicians, and athletes, those with platforms, joined the last, No one wanted to be the last one to speak out. But none of them overshadowed the original footage. The truth didn't need interpretation. It had been filmed, raw, real, irreversible. Then came the edits, documentary-style compilations, music underlay, subtitles, video essays, TikToks turned into 10-part explainers, YouTube creators broke it down with charts. This wasn't just assault, one of them said. This was a revelation. This is what happens when the badge is aimed back. Then came the revelations. A Reddit thread went viral overnight. Who is Bishop? Within hours, users dug through public records, newspaper archives, and blurred screenshots from previous protests. Old complaints resurfaced. Alleged misconduct cases reopened in public memory. A blog post from 4 years ago about excessive force, buried under noise, suddenly had 10,000 new shares. We ignored it then, someone wrote. Not this time. Her name still hadn't been released. But people began calling her something else. The Silent Agent. Not a nickname, a title. It appeared on shirts, on stories, in bio sections. One artist posted a graphic of her. Blood at her lip, badge in her hand, eyes forward. It went viral. The caption, "She didn't blink." So now, we don't either. Bishop's name, on the other hand, was everywhere. The footage had already exposed him. The internet did the rest. His department's website was flooded. Calls, emails, and public records requests. Screenshots of his badge number circulated with side-by-side images from the park. Every new detail became another nail. Every silence from his superiors was another spark. He didn't issue a statement. His department didn't either, and that only made it worse. The silence wasn't safe. It was guilt, amplified. The more they didn't speak, the louder the crowd became. One tweet read, "This is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness." Another, "She didn't threaten him. She revealed him." But perhaps the most brutal comment came from a civil rights attorney who had been quietly watching the storm build. He posted one sentence, black background, white font. This wasn't a slap. It was an entire system punching itself in the face. It was reposted across every platform, screenshotted and shared to story after story. His post ended up on CNN. And through it all, she said nothing. No interview, no press statement, no posts. Her silence wasn't an absence. It was present, strategic, weaponized, a kind of command that made her larger than the moment, more than the target, more than the trigger. She became the mirror, the proof, the symbol, and the people did the speaking for her. The building had never felt so small. The Sheriff County headquarters, a block of reinforced brick and bureaucratic pride, had once been a fortress of command. Now it pulsed with a different energy. Not panic, something colder, like rot waking from within. The emergency meeting was called within 90 minutes of the badge clip hitting national news. The email subject line had said, "Urgent, internal review," but every person in that room knew what it was. A triage of authority, a scramble to distance themselves before the implosion spread. No cameras, no press, just the command circle, badge heavy, face tired, seated in a room that suddenly smelled of sweat and denial. Bishop wasn't in the room. Not yet. That had been deliberate. They needed a head start. At the far end of the table, the sheriff himself stood without speaking, his eyes fixed not on anyone, but on a folder marked Confidential DOJ Active. He hadn't opened it yet. He didn't need to. Everyone knew what was in it. Across from him, a captain spoke first, voice low, clipped, trying to hold on to the rhythm of control. "We're drafting a joint statement. It'll emphasize respect for due process, internal protocols, and departmental transparency." "Don't say transparency," someone cut in. A lieutenant, eyes red, fists clenched. "If we say transparency, they'll ask for records, and we don't have what they want to see." That shut the room down for a second. Silence again. Thick. One of the oldest men in the room, Lieutenant Daniels, 34 years on the force, leaned forward, pulled a small leather wallet from his breast pocket, opened it to reveal his badge, then placed it flat on the table. The sound it made was small, final. "I'm not dying with this brand on me," he said. "Not after what I saw." No one touched the badge. No one moved to pick it up. It sat there like a body. A captain tried to speak. Daniels, this isn't the time for performative. But the older man cut him off. 6 times, he said, his voice louder now, not angry, clear. 6 formal complaints. 6. And every one of them disappeared. That word disappeared didn't echo. It drilled. The sheriff closed the folder finally. Inside, the printout was clean. 3 pages, single-spaced. Top paragraph, Kenneth Bishop, subject of prior misconduct allegations. Second paragraph, internal dismissals signed under Clause 14R, justified on a procedural basis. And below that, a date. All 6 complaints had been wiped out on the same week, 3 years ago. A rattle of sound came from the hallway. Keys maybe, or boots. But no one turned their head. They all knew who was outside. Bishop, waiting, one hand likely on his belt. The other was probably still believing he'd walk out of this with a reprimand and not a target on his name. A major stood. "We need legal," she said. "We need strategy." Another voice, this time the department's internal affairs rep, shook his head. "We're past strategy. The NAACP just released a statement. They're opening 13 files linked to officers assigned under Bishop. That includes Daniels, that includes Romero, that includes me." No one breathed, he continued. "Their legal team says, and I quote, 'She is not the incident. She is the ignition.'" No one needed to ask who she was. The video had already replaced her name with a symbol. Her face was in inboxes and TVs in the break room, printed onto phone cases, burned into silence. Then, like fate had been waiting for its cue, a ping came from the far screen. Someone mirrored their laptop. The email subject line read, "Internal device sync detected -Cam 12. The room froze. Cam 12 was Bishop's locker hallway, and someone had synced a body cam file that was never uploaded. They opened it. The footage was grainy, but the audio was clear. Bishop's voice, recorded 3 months earlier. He was talking to someone, another officer. "Don't worry," Bishop said, voice casual, easy. "I got it buried. It won't stick. We know how to clean it." Then a laugh, not long, just short enough to feel real. Then another voice replied, off camera, "They always believe the report if we file first." The screen went dark. No one said anything for a long time. Someone in the back exhaled, loud, involuntary. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Call DOJ," he said quietly. "Tell them we're opening full cooperation." Another officer, young, still hopeful, raised his hand slightly. "Do we notify Bishop?" The sheriff looked at him like he'd asked if they should call the son. "He'll know." Outside the conference room, Bishop sat alone in the hallway. His back was straight, but his eyes were wide, listening. The door was thick. But some truths don't need sound to be heard. It didn't take long for the cracks to deepen. Once the silence at Sheriff County collapsed under the weight of internal files and dropped badges, what rose next wasn't just fallout, it was revelation. And it started, as most exposures do, with a sound, a file, anonymous, no header, no metadata, just a single line of text. You need to hear what they never archived. The message was sent to a secure DOJ inbox tied to the federal agent at the center of the case. She didn't open it immediately. She waited, verified its chain, ran its security twice. Only then did she hit play. What she heard wasn't screaming. It wasn't violence. It wasn't the chaos of a body cam or the panic of a pursuit. It was far worse. Calm voices. Inside a precinct office. Quiet laughter. A conversation not meant to be heard beyond those walls. "It won't stick," one voice said, male, mid-40s, confident. "It's handled, the paperwork's already clean." A pause, then another voice, this one sharper, colder, more decisive. "He won't be charged. We took care of the file, same way we did with the Holloway mess." The first man chuckled. "That one? Hell, we had to rewrite half his damn report." The second voice. "Yeah, but no one's suing when the circle signs off. You know how it goes." The circle. The word landed with weight, a code disguised as banter. The call ended there. But it didn't need to go longer. The implications echoed long after the file stopped. She played it again. Slower, louder, took notes, matched voice patterns, ran it through the DOJ internal logs. She didn't react visibly. No raised eyebrows, no clenched fists. Just a pen across paper. precise, intentional. Then she uploaded the clip to the encrypted DOJ vault. It wasn't evidence yet, not officially, but it was fire, and someone had just handed her the match. By the time the leak made its way to a journalist named Reza Hart, an independent reporter known for uncovering police conspiracies, public tension had already shifted. It was no longer about Bishop. It was about what Bishop represented. Reza released her exposé under the headline, "The Circle, Shield, or Syndicate." The article was simple. 5 names, 5 officers. All served in different departments over the last decade, all transferred through the Bishop's watch. Each had complaints filed and dismissed. Each had appeared on internal logs for misconduct. None were ever suspended. Reza didn't need to accuse. She presented. She published the audio, the quotes, the timestamps, screenshots of internal documents, black bars redacting names, but not the pattern. She labeled the group the Bishop Circle, but it was the hashtag that truly caught fire. Bishop Circle exploded, not on TikTok, not on public news feeds, but on the closed forums where law enforcement talked among themselves. Threads appeared overnight. Some were filled with denial, others with paranoia. But one post, from an anonymous user using the alias switchdog_87, said what others only whispered. It wasn't just Bishop. He was never smart enough to run it alone. That post was screenshotted, posted to Reddit, then Twitter, then CNN. Within hours, Bishop's Circle was trending nationally. The narrative had shifted. Bishop was no longer the center. He was the doorway, and people were now looking at what stood behind him. Forums swarmed with theories. Internal officers began leaking minor documents, shift logs, reassignment memos, altered timestamps. But not because they wanted fame, because they were scared, not of the DOJ, but of being the next body in a broken system's basement. The woman at the center of it all never commented. She didn't issue a press statement. She didn't grant interviews. She simply acknowledged receipt of the file, opened a case log, titled it Circle, Internal Domestic Suppression Review. That's when it became official. Not just a scandal, a DOJ investigation. Codename, backed, armed, and aimed inward. Bishop hadn't just fallen. He had dragged a network with him. One built on silence. And someone, somewhere, was about to lose a lot more than a badge. There was no podium strong enough to carry what she held, but she stood behind one anyway. Not for protection, but to make a point. The press had gathered fast, lenses long and ready, lights prepped like crosshairs. No one knew what she would say, but they all showed up because they knew it mattered now. The wind moved her coat slightly, but she didn't adjust it. She let the moment frame itself. Her voice came out level, deliberate. "I am not the story," she began, "but I do have the power to end one." Flashbulbs, but no interruptions. "This is not about an officer," she continued. "It is about a structure, one that allowed him, one that erased the truth behind him, one that now answers to more than itself." She paused. Then, "I have a system behind me, and I will make it move." The sentence didn't soar. It hit, because she didn't say it like a threat. She said it like a guarantee. Cameras turned. Some panned to the building behind her. DOJ officials are visible through the glass. Badges, suits, movement. It wasn't a photo op, it was a mobilization. She stepped away from the microphone, said no more. That was enough. Within 2 hours, the Bureau of Internal Oversight received her first formal submission, a file titled Internal Manipulation, Pattern Investigation Request, Bishop, Circle, attached, a link, a separate file, encrypted. In it, a full email thread, headers, dates, edits, all showing how 6 prior complaints against Bishop had been rewritten, softened, some outright deleted. The whistleblower had come anonymously. The email subject read, "I'm done protecting people who wouldn't protect my family." The sender used an internal sheriff domain, no name, but the documents were real. She confirmed the metadata. She read every thread, cross-referenced staff IDs, noted the most damning signature at the bottom of one edited form. Little M. Granger. She didn't forward it, she escalated it. DOJ's internal systems were now in motion. Level C1 review triggered. That meant subpoena power. That meant asset tracking. That meant computers were pulled from desks before coffee breaks ended. This wasn't internal affairs, this was structural diagnostics. She hadn't launched a complaint, she had issued a scan. And the first results came quickly. DOJ contacted her back within a day. Pattern confirmed, activation recommended. Translation: dig deeper, broader. She signed the second directive, date stamped. Badge signed. Now it was official. Federal Investigative Coordination on Internal Law Enforcement Collusion, West Division. She didn't smile. She didn't relax. She didn't post. She reviewed, watched, planned, because now the machine was hers to aim. Then came the allies, quiet at first. A message from a mid-level officer in the state precinct, black, 15 years in service. It read, "If you lead, we will stand." She replied, "Don't stand behind, stand beside." Within 48 hours, an organization representing black law enforcement officers across 4 counties publicly announced their support for the federal review. They released their statement, using her phrasing directly. "We are not alone. We never were. We are now aligned." That same afternoon, another piece hit the public wire. An image. It wasn't from her, it was taken by a witness, a still frame. She was standing at the bottom steps of Sheriff County HQ. Her back was straight, her head level. The sun was casting her shadow long and centered. On the wall behind her, someone had stenciled a phrase in black marker, not large, but clear. It read, "Silence is the privilege of the armed." The caption under the post went viral. 4 words, "She is not silent." T-shirts appeared within a day. Profile pictures changed, not to slogans, just to her eyes, her posture, her proof. Bishop's name was now buried under a wave of bigger questions. And she didn't become louder, she became permanent. Her files didn't rest. Her case numbers multiplied. She assigned new requests. She built timelines. She requested forensic audits on internal servers. Not for drama, for accuracy, for records, for answers. One DOJ analyst joked in a closed memo, "She's building a firewall around the truth and daring them to touch it." No one laughed, because she was, and it was working. The system she had summoned began to dig, not with shovels, but with subpoenas. Requests, logs, patterns, and deep within that excavation something old blinked back. It came not from a top agent or a veteran analyst, but from a junior intern. Name redacted in public reports. Age 24. Assignment: cross-record complaint suppression patterns in mid-tier precincts. What he found wasn't a smoking gun. It was an entire drawer of burned matches. A file buried in the back end of a server marked 2017 Resolved Cases. Inside, 3 incident reports were linked to Officer Kenneth Bishop. Each one marked recommendation termination. Each one was tagged follow-up, awaiting clearance. But all 3 were closed with the same final stamp. Dismissed by Order 88D. No signature, no title. Just that string of alphanumeric code, 88D. It might have been a formality, it might have been a clerk's error, but it wasn't, and everyone who saw it knew it. The intern flagged the file and escalated it. It hit the federal agent's inbox within 90 minutes. She printed it, laid it flat on her desk, grabbed a red pen, circled the line, thick, deliberate. Then, beside it, she wrote a question, not rhetorical, not abstract, a demand. Who is 88D? That question became a thread. The thread became a wall, a map, a timeline. And across 5 years, it told a story no one had planned to tell. Bishop had been moved, not promoted, not demoted, just relocated. 4 precincts, 5 years. No disciplinary mark ever followed him. But every time a complaint was filed, he disappeared from one office and reappeared in another. The complaints vanished, he didn't. Her team ran the numbers. His assignments all occurred within 2 weeks of new command transitions. Every move approved, every signature's clean. But one thing didn't move with him: the witnesses. One of them had submitted a complaint in 2017, a fellow officer, Junior, assigned to Bishop's beat. The complaint was internal, not public. It alleged intimidation, evidence tampering, threats. The officer who submitted it had been placed on indefinite leave. They never returned. The agent found him through private HR records. Now working construction in another state, she made contact. No pressure, just a question: "Do you still stand by what you filed?" His response: "I lost a career over it." "Of course I do." He agreed to speak under anonymity. He confirmed his report, described a conversation he overheard in 2017. Bishop and a lieutenant joking about a ghost stamp that could shut down any paper trail. When pressed, he recalled the exact phrase: "As long as 88D signs it, it's like it never happened." That was the break. The language, the mythology. 88D wasn't a file code, it was a person, a gatekeeper, somewhere high enough to override termination recommendations, somewhere protected. She dug deeper, ran command logs, approval workflows, found one name recurring in every clearance cluster between 2, 0, 1, 5, 2, 0, 1, 9, Stroud, WL, internal position then, Deputy Director of Oversight, known internally for cleaning up political distractions. Current position, Senior Advisor to the Governor. No press connection, no flagged complaints. But his initials were in the routing path for each of Bishop's cleared records. She didn't accuse. Not yet. She highlighted, isolated, printed every page with his initials, laid them out in sequence, drew lines. Every time Bishop was supposed to fall, 88D caught him, not by name, but by function. That's how power protects itself, by never leaving fingerprints. Only authorization codes. The agent didn't make a press release. She didn't leak. She compiled, cross-checked, verified, then wrote one sentence at the top of her next report: "We are no longer investigating an officer. We are tracing a mechanism." The moment the name surfaced, everything sharpened. No more initials, no more redacted files or internal designators, just a full name, typed in black, bold, official across her screen: William L. Stroud. She didn't react at first. She read the summary, cross-checked, traced. But once the verification hit, once the final routing chain confirmed it was his hand behind the clearance on Bishop's dismissal, she did what she always did. She pulled his history, not the press releases, the operations, the command decisions, the closed-door calls. During Ferguson in 2014, his name showed up repeatedly in oversight logs, and always with one common thread: containment, not justice, not reform, not true. Stroud was a strategist of silence, and silence had made him powerful. He had moved through the system like a shadow in a cathedral, untouched, respected, feared. Now he was a senior political advisor at the state level. No badge, no gun, just reach. But the paper trail had caught him, and this time the system was no longer working behind him. It was waking against him. She drafted the first report. Subject: W.L. Stroud. Authorization of complaint dismissals, 88D code path. Attached were timestamps, email routing protocols, and 3 cross-referenced audio clips where his initials had been mentioned, indirectly but undeniably. She didn't send it to the press. She sent it to the DOJ Internal Review, Political Liaison Division. 27 minutes later, her phone lit up. Unknown number. No introduction, just a voice. Male, low, crisp. "You're escalating something you don't understand." She didn't blink. Then, "Explain it." Silence. Then, "This won't lead where you think it will." Her answer was the click of the line disconnecting. She called a press conference that afternoon. No warm-up, no leak, just time, date, and location. They filled the room anyway. The air was charged, not curious, expectant. She stood behind the podium, adjusted the mic once, and began. "I've been asked what the next step is," she said. "The answer is the same as it was in the first step. Truth." She held up a single page, not for flair, for clarity. It was the clearance document from 2017, with dismissed by order, 88D underlined. Today, she continued, we confirm the identity of the person who signed off on that code, William L. Stroud, former Deputy Director of Internal Affairs, current advisor to the State Executive Office. The room shifted. Phones raised, breaths pulled. Mr. Stroud, she said, her tone calm, cutting, is no longer behind a desk with a badge. But his influence has not ended. It has merely changed forms. And today we begin asking what else he signed, and who else paid the price. She stepped back, said nothing more. The clip aired within the hour. Online, the effect was instant. Straub's name flooded search engines. Posts from 10 years ago resurfaced. Screenshots of a televised interview in 2014, where he smirked at a black journalist and said, "Protesters don't need to be heard, they need to be handled." That clip alone was played 1.6 million times in 3 hours. The caption read, "This is who buried the reports." Stroud released a statement that evening. Short, cold, and deflective, I served my duty to the best of my legal capacity. Any attempts to politicize internal documentation are irresponsible, but it didn't slow the current. It accelerated it. That night, a state senator called for a public hearing. Her words echoed across news networks. We will not let shadows extend their reach into the next generation. We need sunlight now, sunlight and subpoenas. The agent said nothing. She didn't need to. Her work had already spoken loud, and it was just beginning. The lights in the studio were precise, too precise. Angled, calibrated, unforgiving. But she didn't flinch under them. She wore no makeup, team's polish, no PR smile, no scripted pause. She came as she was, controlled, present, undistracted. The host leaned forward, voice smooth like a seasoned radio ad. Before we begin, let me say, what happened to you was horrific. I just want to ask, how are you feeling now? A beat. Her eyes didn't soften. Her posture didn't shift. Her answer was clean. That's not the right question. The audience held its breath. The host blinked, a flicker of confusion disrupting the polish. Sorry, what do you mean? She turned slightly, not toward him, but toward the camera, toward the people watching. I'm not here to tell you how I feel. I'm here to ask, how many people who weren't me never lived long enough to be asked that question? There was no music cue, no applause. Only stillness. Then, sharp as a blade, wrong question. I'm not here for pity. The Vietnamese needed no translation. The room felt the cut. The director didn't cut the feed. The host cleared his throat, trying again. I think what the public wants is to understand how this felt for you, personally. She didn't let him finish. Personal? I'm a federal officer. My personal experience doesn't matter more than protocol. I was assaulted during the performance of duty. The question is not how I felt, but how he thought he could. A pause. And why so many did before him. The host backed off. He pivoted. There's a clip making the rounds of you not reacting when you were struck, not crying, not shouting. Some say it's because you were trained to remain calm under pressure. I didn't remain calm, she said. I remained lawful. The host blinked again. That distinction is important to you? It should be important to all of you, she said, because if calm is optional, law is not. The line landed like thunder, sharp, echoing. Online, it was clipped within minutes, reposted, captioned. I didn't remain calm. I remained lawful. Hashtag not your victim. The host changed tactics. There are people who say what happened to you is emblematic of a larger breakdown. Would you say this exposed flaws in the system? Her eyes didn't move. I didn't expose a flaw. I followed the trail of one. Which trail? The one that started with a slap and ended with a signature? You're referring to William Stroud? I'm referring to a structure. He's just the architecture that survived too many audits. Another viral moment. Another clipped video. Another digital tremor. A retired FBI director posted the exchange with the caption, "She is not an interview. She is a textbook on how to dismantle a system from inside it." The host made one final attempt. Last question. If you could say one thing to the public, what would it be? She looked straight into the camera. Do not call me brave. Call me necessary. The screen went black 2 seconds later. No applause, no fade-out music. Just the weight of her words lingered long after the show ended. He entered quietly, but the silence didn't owe him anything. Bishop moved through the corridor with shoulders hunched. Not from fatigue, but from the slow collapse of identity. The room was small, functional. A space meant for waiting, not for confession, but he made it into both. She sat on the bench, posture flawless, coat neatly folded beside her, legs still, hands calm, breath controlled. She didn't turn her head, didn't adjust her position, didn't acknowledge his presence until he was already standing in front of her, stripped of everything that once made him loud. The badge was gone, the belt empty, the arrogance dissolved. But his eyes, they were still searching for some form of structure to obey, a hierarchy to protect him. There was none. He cleared his throat once, then tried again, the words failing to come with authority and instead limping through the air. I didn't know if it was even okay to speak to you. She said nothing. The silence wasn't cruel. It was earned. It was the sound of someone who had endured more than she ever expressed, whose power came not from what she said, but from what she no longer needed to say. I know this doesn't fix anything, he continued, his voice breaking on the edge of desperation and shame. I only did what I was trained to do. And there it was, the last shield, lifted like a confession but meant to soften the fall. She finally turned her head toward him. Slowly, not because she was acknowledging him, but because it was time for him to understand he'd already been seen. And I am the result of what I was forced to learn to survive, she replied, not with bitterness, but with surgical truth. Her voice didn't waver. It was low, exact, the kind of statement that doesn't need to be raised to be heard. He sat down across from her without permission, as if he hoped humility would excuse history. I know now. He whispered, I see it. What it was. What I was a part of. She let the words land. Let him hear how they sounded in the space between them. You weren't part of it, she said after a pause. You were the product of it, and you enforced it. His hands curled slightly, as if bracing for impact that never came, because she didn't need to raise her voice for him to feel dismantled. We were told to be proactive, he said, to prevent threats, to make calls before they became headlines. She nodded once, not in agreement, but in confirmation. And you made the headlines, and now you're learning what it means to be a threat to a system you thought you were protecting. He looked down. They're not defending me. Not anymore. Everyone's gone quiet. She let him sit in that silence, the exact silence she'd carried in her lungs the day he put his hand on his belt, the day he didn't ask, the day he assumed. They trained me to act, he said again, like a scratched record repeating its damage. And they trained you to assume your innocence, she answered. But that's over. The world has seen, and now you're here, not to apologize, but to be seen as a mistake instead of a choice. His eyes met hers, for the first time, not to challenge, not to condescend, but to plead. I don't want to be remembered for that moment. Her response was immediate. You won't be. You'll be remembered for what you did afterward, and you're doing it now, by sitting in the ruins of what you helped build. He wiped at his eyes, the motion awkward, untrained. I'm not looking for redemption. That's good, she said, because it's not something you get to ask for. It's something others choose to give, or not. He nodded, slowly, his hands now resting palms up as if ready to receive something intangible. You don't have to carry this, he said. You don't have to keep it in your chest. She leaned forward slightly, just enough to make her point land harder. I don't carry this because I choose to. I carry it because the world made it impossible to set down. Every time someone like you made a choice and called it a protocol, someone like me had to survive it and still function. I am not a martyr. I am a result, and this country better learn the difference. He cried then, not performatively, not for show, the kind of cry that breaks in places words can't reach. He didn't sob, he leaked, quietly, slowly, like a structure collapsing inward. She didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't reach out, because she understood that justice isn't always restorative. Sometimes it's just this, a mirror held steady. "I don't represent the pain of my community," she said softly. "I am not here to speak for all of us, but I will never let you pretend it didn't happen. You don't get to erase it. You don't get to call it a misunderstanding. You don't get to make it academic. You lived with the privilege of erasure. I live with the permanence of memory." His shoulders sagged, the last bit of posture gone. "I don't even know who I am now." "Then figure it out," she said, "but not by asking me to write the new version of you. That's your work, not mine." The door opened. A staffer in a navy suit leaned in. "They're ready for you, Agent." She stood, smoothly, like water that had always known where it needed to flow. She turned from him without another word, her steps measured, not symbolic, necessary. As she passed the doorway, she didn't look back, because what needed to be said had already been said, and what needed to be broken was already breaking. Bishop remained seated on the bench, surrounded by the stillness he once weaponized, now powerless to move it. He wasn't handcuffed, he wasn't escorted, he wasn't silenced. He was simply alone. The week didn't begin with a headline. It began with a rupture. The DOJ issued a statement not with the softness of political caution, but with the blunt force of consequence. 8 police departments were now under federal investigation, not reviewed, not audited, investigated. And not because a whistleblower stepped forward, but because a system, once used to hide the cracks, now stood as evidence of them. It wasn't one precinct gone rogue. It was 8. 8 cities, 8 chains of command, 8 variations of the same silence finally being broken. The media didn't know how to keep up. The story was no longer local. It wasn't even national. It was structural. And the name no longer dominating headlines wasn't Bishop. It wasn't Stroud. It was hers, and not because she had spoken, but because she had stopped. She disappeared from interviews, declined panels, skipped op-eds. She didn't vanish. She simply refused to translate her silence into spectacle. But it didn't matter. She was quoted in every room she didn't enter. Images of her badge, her stare, her refusal to back down. All of it became symbols. And without a single new sentence from her mouth, the country began to speak louder than it ever had before. Networks pivoted entire specials to unpack the cultural weight of "from badge to symbol," a phrase coined by an independent journalist who said, "We are watching the difference between enforcement and embodiment." Talk shows stopped asking, "What happens next?" and began asking, "How did it go this long?" Experts appeared, then activists, then civilians, but most importantly, survivors, people who had never been heard before. And they didn't need microphones, they had memory. A teacher from Michigan, now 54, appeared on a local station with hands that trembled only when she described the sidewalk. "In 2018, I was walking home from a school meeting," she said. "A patrol car rolled up beside me. They asked where I was going. I said, home. That wasn't enough. I said I was a teacher. That wasn't enough. When I reached for my ID, they threw me down." Her voice didn't shake on that sentence. It cracked on the next. "I didn't have a badge to raise. No one filmed it. I just had to teach the next day." Her story was followed by another, and then another. A man in Baltimore showed his medical records. A woman in Arizona read her 911 call log aloud. A college student from 2020 said, "They made me kneel, told me I was being dramatic. I wasn't even protesting, I was just brown and outside." The airwaves filled, not with opinions, but with receipts. Hashtags surged, "No badge, no backup," trended for 36 hours straight. Forums flooded with people reposting her image, not because she asked them to, but because she had become what they never had, undeniable. The DOJ didn't wait for more noise. They acted. They subpoenaed command records, demanded access to dispatch archives, pulled internal complaint logs from precincts that had once prided themselves on internal resolution. But now, the term internal was synonymous with ignored. For the first time, law enforcement was not being asked to explain their procedures. They were being asked why no one had intervened sooner. And she stayed silent. By design. Not out of fear, but out of discipline, because she knew that the moment she re-entered the conversation, she would become the focus again. And this wasn't about her anymore. This was about the system that made her necessary. A former FBI agent wrote in The Atlantic, "She didn't just expose abuse. She exposed the comfort that allowed abuse to repeat. She is no longer an agent of the law. She is now an axis of consequence." Publications began comparing her posture to civil rights photos from the 60s, not in aesthetic, but in purpose. Her refusal to perform grief, her precision in speaking only facts, her quiet withdrawal from media after the hearings, it created an absence louder than any campaign. "What she didn't say," wrote one New York Times columnist, "changed more minds than any soundbite ever could." Then came the pivot no one expected: international coverage. A Brazilian newspaper ran her photo with the caption, "A justice not loud, but immovable." In South Africa, a journalist wrote, "She did not cry on television. She cross-examined silence." Even in the quiet, her presence held shape. Law schools began redesigning their ethics modules to include a course called Systemic Silence: The Cost of Unchecked Authority. A university in Boston commissioned a mural, her silhouette in grayscale. Behind it, the words, "Truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just doesn't flinch." And through all of it, she made no further statement. That restraint became its philosophy. Activists stopped asking her to lead marches. They quoted her instead. Politicians stopped offering her roles. They cited her as precedent. She didn't run for office. She became the bar by which others were measured. Bishop never spoke to the press again. His silence, unlike hers, was empty, defensive, stripped of integrity. His name became a caution, not a villain. Stroud was subpoenaed. He gave a 4-hour deposition under closed session. His lawyer declined interviews. He disappeared into redacted documents and pending trials. His legacy now lived only in the footnotes of failure. But her silence stood like a monument, not to trauma, but to restrain, to the kind of leadership that doesn't inflate itself. It just endures. And the people, those who had never once had the room to speak, they filled the air she left behind, not because she commanded them to, but because she reminded them they could. If one day you are reading this, my daughter, it means the law has lived long enough to preserve memory, not just moments. This letter isn't a retelling of pain, but a preservation of purpose. I am not writing to tell you what happened to me. You will find that in reports, in broadcasts, in court records, in the way people hesitate before they say my name. I am writing to explain why I didn't flinch. On a bright day that turned heavy, I was struck in the face by a man who wore a badge not to protect, but to project. His hand was not just flesh, it was authority, routine, unchecked power. But I didn't flinch. Not because I wasn't afraid, I was. Not because it didn't hurt, it did. But I didn't flinch because I knew the moment I did, they would tell the story differently. They would say I provoked, that I escalated, that I was unstable. So I stayed still, not out of defiance, but out of clarity. Sometimes, stillness is not silence. It is a strategy. That day was not the beginning. It was not an origin story. It was a point in a long sequence, a knot in a rope I've been pulling on for years. You will hear people talk about it like a spark. But sparks only matter because there's fuel. There had been fuel for decades, centuries. My stillness lit nothing. It just revealed the fire that had always been there. I need you to understand that power does not introduce itself politely. It enters often, assuming welcome. That man did not ask who I was. He did not ask if I needed help. He saw my skin, my silence, and my presence and decided those things were a problem. And because I didn't lower my eyes, because I didn't speak with fear, he decided to remind me of the hierarchy he believed in. And so he raised his voice, and then he raised his hand. There will be moments in your life when people will try to measure you by the way you respond to provocation. They will say strength is how loud you get, how quick you strike back. But that day I learned that true power is restraint with purpose. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge. I let him make his mistake, and when the world saw it, they finally believed what so many had been trying to explain with words alone. But this letter's not about him, and it is not about me. It is about what comes after the truth is no longer deniable. When I wrote my report that day, I didn't write about pain. I wrote about a sequence. I logged the time, the tone, and the gestures. I documented how my hand never moved, how my voice remained level, because that is how law survives, by refusing to collapse into opinion. You must learn to distinguish emotion from erosion. They will try to blur the line. Don't let them. People will ask you what justice feels like. You must tell them it doesn't feel like anything. It functions. If it starts feeling too good, too easy, too cinematic, it's probably no longer justice. It might be vengeance, or theater, or distraction. And you, my daughter, must always serve something deeper. They called me many things in the days after. Some said I was brave. Some said I was manipulative. Some said I was dangerous. I accepted none of those titles. I was prepared, and when preparation meets moment, it looks like power, but don't confuse preparedness with peace. I am not at peace. I am in motion. You will be told to stay still, to stay polite, to stay gracious, but you do not owe graciousness to structures that were not built to include you. What you owe is discipline. You owe truth its proper shape. You owe memory its full context. One day, someone may try to make you choose between integrity and acceptance. Choose integrity. Acceptance will follow, or it won't, but your reflection will remain whole. You may be asked if your silence is weakness. Say no. Say it is a strategy forged in the fire of restraint. Say that silence is not absence. It is a placeholder for action. But make sure it ends. Make sure it is only a beginning. This letter is not for applause. It is not for publication. It will sit in a file under your name. And if you never read it, that's fine. That will mean the world no longer needs it. But if the world still struggles to remember who built the scaffolding of accountability, then you must read this and remember, I didn't build it alone, but I reinforced it with truth. There was a moment in the aftermath when someone asked me what I hoped to accomplish. I told them nothing short of memory. I wanted the country to remember what it forgets too quickly. That law without oversight is just theater with guns. That peace without justice is just silence with fear. That order without equity is just control with a flag. You may grow up in a world where my name is used as a reference. That's not legacy. Legacy is what you do with the system I challenged. Legacy is whether or not you let the pattern return. So let this badge not be a relic of fear, but a reminder of restraint. Let it not crown the righteous, but convict the reckless. If you must carry it as a shield for others, not a sword for yourself. You will be asked to compromise. You will be tempted to silence the inconvenient. But remember, silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is complicity in a uniform. And finally, don't let the badge be where power begins. Let it be where error ends. With all my strength, your mother. The cameras were already rolling before the doors opened. No music, no narration. Just the weight of attention held in collective breath. Bishop entered without cuffs, without resistance, but also with armor. His face was pale, not with fear, but with the recognition that history was no longer negotiable. He walked toward the dais where a black box waited. Not a coffin, a container, not of death, but of finality. There were no chants, no protests, no applause, just the sterile sound of a federal hall, where justice was not shouted, but carried out in procedural silence. Across the room, journalists stood shoulder to shoulder. Their pens weren't moving, their recorders were. This moment was not about commentary, it was about evidence. The presiding official didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The words were printed on the docket, already distributed to every major outlet in the country. Ceremonial revocation of authority, badge 41, 12A. The badge wasn't taken as a weapon. It was removed like a mask. One hand reached forward, slow, deliberate, not to humiliate, but to document. The metal glinted once under the overhead light, then dulled immediately as fingers clasped it. It did not resist. It simply ceased to be warm. Bishop stood still. No protest, no apology. His shoulders were slightly slumped, not in grief, but in vacancy. He didn't cry. He didn't blink excessively. He didn't whisper. There was nothing to defend anymore. No posture to maintain. He looked not at the cameras, not at the people, not at the black box where his badge would rest. He looked down, not as a gesture of remorse, but as a man finally realizing he had no place to look up toward. The officer removing the badge didn't speak. He didn't need to. The moment was built on quiet precision. It clicked out of place, metal against metal, and landed with a thud softer than expected but heavier than anyone in the room could measure. As it was lowered into the black box, standard issue, velvet-lined, marked with a serial number, it became clear that this wasn't a ceremony. It was a conclusion. A woman in the gallery exhaled through her nose. A child shifted in his seat. Someone adjusted a microphone that had captured nothing but breath, and Bishop stood motionless, not out of discipline, but because he had been drained of all roles. The badge, now enclosed, didn't glow. It didn't even catch the light anymore. It was dull, fingerprinted, and sealed. The box was closed with a mechanical hiss, a latch engaged, a number stamped, 4112A. That was all. No name. Just a record. The chair behind the bishop remained untouched. He was never meant to sit. He was meant to stand and be unmade, and so he did. Outside the courtroom, reporters crowded barricades. They didn't cheer. They asked no questions. They had already written the story. They were just waiting for the visual. When Bishop stepped out of the building, there was no riot, no security escort, just an open sidewalk and a closed chapter. His presence was no longer threatening. It was obsolete. In the distance, a child watched from behind a parent's leg, small hands gripping fabric. "Mom?" the child asked quietly. "Was that a toy?" The mother didn't answer right away. How do you explain to a child that symbols, once emptied of integrity, resemble playthings more than power? A nearby journalist caught the moment and tweeted it. No caption. Just the quote, "Was that a toy?" It went viral in under 2 hours, because somewhere in that question lived the entire disassembly of false authority. When power loses meaning, even children mistake it for plastic. Later that evening, news anchors replayed the footage of the badge being removed, over and over, frame by frame. Not to sensationalize, but to emphasize. One outlet slowed it down to show the precise moment when Bishop's eyes stopped tracking the process. Another froze the image as the box closed, highlighting the fact that no one clapped, no one stood. Justice, they said, had learned not to perform. There were no speeches from officials, no victory laps from politicians. The silence of the moment was its power. Bishop hadn't just lost a badge, he'd lost the illusion that came with it, the myth that a title justifies its bearer, that a symbol can replace scrutiny. And that, in the end, was the most devastating sentence. Not delivered by the court, not written in ink, but executed in front of a nation that had learned, finally, to distinguish between gold and guilt. The office wasn't large, but it was deliberate. Every object inside it chosen for function, not appearance. The light from the window cut across the desk in clean geometry, catching the edge of a small unopened case, gleaming faintly against the matte grain of the wood. Inside it lay the new badge, still untouched, crisp, edged not just in metal but in mandate. Next to it, placed not with ceremony but conviction, rested the old badge, a scuff along its base, a faded serial number, and a story pressed into its surface without words. She hadn't worn it since the day it had fallen to the grass, sunlight bouncing off its shame, but she had kept it, not out of sentiment, but out of truth. The walls of the office bore no plaques, no portraits, only silence folded into structure. Every drawer was locked not out of secrecy, but discipline. Her chair sat low to the ground, firm but not harsh, and when she sat, she did so without ceremony, as though continuing a conversation that had never really paused. Emails were waiting, unopened files flagged in red, an inbox that had become less an archive and more a pulse. She scanned names she did not yet know but would come to remember with precision. The badge to her left had known neglect. It had been thrown, dropped, captured in pixels, turned into hashtags, dissected on cable news. Once, it had been duct-taped to a dartboard on the set of a satire show. Another time, it had been scanned into an augmented reality filter that let users toss it into a virtual furnace, watching it melt in slow motion as cheers erupted from avatars bearing protest slogans. She had seen the footage in silence, lips tight, not in defense but in recognition, because what that badge had represented, once pride, then power, then something brittle and blind, had long ceased to be hers. Another time, in the graffiti-stained underpass near the 7th Precinct, someone had spray-painted its exact outline onto the wall, but distorted. Its edges cracked, its center filled with red concentric rings, like a target bleeding from the center out. She had walked past it at dusk, not stopping, only registering the echo of a laugh from across the street, where two teenagers watched her with a mixture of pity and triumph. The badge had become more than a symbol. It had mutated, replicated, turned viral not through celebration but rejection. It had been photoshopped into the hands of dictators, embedded into fictional conspiracies, clipped out of context into 10-second clips that boiled down whole decades into condemnation. In one exhibit, at a downtown gallery, an artist had suspended a replica of it in resin, surrounded by shattered phones, each labeled with the name of someone whose footage had contradicted its authority. She had gone on a Tuesday, anonymous in a gray coat, and stood in front of it for 11 minutes, breathing once for every name she recognized. None of it was accidental. The slow dismantling of the symbol, the stripping of its once assumed inviolability, was not a cultural spasm. It was deliberate, honed, and generational. And yet, here it was, the real one, not cast in resin, not doctored into spectacle, resting quietly beside its replacement. Its weight no longer came from what it had once meant, but from what it had survived, from what she had survived. The desk, bare but exacting, offered no comfort, only clarity. She didn't touch the new badge, not yet. Not because she doubted, but because she remembered. Another time it was deep-faked into a video where it disintegrated into ash at the touch of a child's hand. People had made memes of its reflection bouncing off riot gear, captioned with words she didn't need to reread to remember. That badge was no longer just an object. It had been a witness, a symbol, and at times a curse. Yet it remained, inert but undeniable, its presence a cold record of rupture. She did not apologize to it. She did not revere it. She simply let it stay. It had earned that. The new badge, pristine and unstained, glinted faintly under her gaze. It came not with glory, but with gravity. Her team had not yet arrived. Outside, the city moved with routine, but something had shifted beneath its motion, a kind of collective pause, like a breath held too long. She adjusted the collar of her jacket as the morning sun skimmed across the cracked sidewalk below, catching the subtle shimmer of broken glass embedded in the concrete, like sediment left behind by a flood no one wanted to remember. That morning, a courier had delivered a small envelope, anonymous, untraceable, containing nothing but a single screenshot from an old live stream. Now resurrected and captioned, she watched and did nothing. The image was grainy but unmistakable, her face caught mid-turn, lips pressed into silence as a boy screamed off-camera. They had slowed the clip down, added a heartbeat effect, and made it viral again. She had seen it posted beneath threads that asked if remorse could ever be retroactive, if inaction was just a quieter form of harm. Later that day, an art collective unveiled a sculpture downtown, 8 feet tall, cast in dark resin, shaped in the form of a woman holding a badge that dripped like wax from her hands. At the unveiling, a child placed a lit match at the statue's base, and the flame, though symbolic, was broadcast live with hashtags that trended before sunset. The city had changed since the first time she wore that uniform. The skyline remained jagged, the streets still restless, but the noise had shifted frequencies, from rage to reckoning, from slogan to sentence. At a cafe 2 blocks from the precinct, a mural had been painted overnight, a faceless officer kneeling, not in solidarity, but in surrender. Arms extended, with a badge held out like an apology, too late to be accepted. She had walked past it at dawn, its paint still wet, the colors bleeding slightly into the brick, as if unable to contain the urgency it was born from. The precinct doors opened with a hiss, the old hydraulics long overdue for replacement. Inside, the reception area was dim, filtered through tinted glass that muted the world outside. A man had come in the day before, not to report a crime, but to read a list. Names of those detained, harmed, erased. He read each name like a psalm, then left without waiting for acknowledgement. No one stopped him. No one spoke. It was not a confrontation. It was an audit. In the locker room, someone had taped an old headline to the back of the mirror. Officer cleared of all charges. A red marker had slashed through the word cleared, and beneath it a question had been scribbled in blocky print. But who cleans the blood? She didn't remove it. She had looked at her reflection and let it fracture around the edges of that paper. Not shame, just the weight of what didn't vanish. Across the street, the window of a bakery once frequented by the precinct staff now bore a sign, "We don't serve erasure." The implication wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. The baker, a woman in her 60s, had once donated cookies to Officer Appreciation Day. Now she offered free pastries to those holding civil complaints. The past hadn't just been remembered, it had been repurposed. At her desk, the screensaver flickered on, a cascade of encrypted reports waiting review, but her eyes lingered on the side window where a pigeon had perched, coiled like the city itself, watchful and ready to scatter. The reports could wait. She turned instead to the folder marked Retained Footage. Inside, clips too sensitive to delete, too haunting to forget. One showed a man's voice breaking mid-sentence as he realized no one had called for backup. Another showed silence so long it hummed. She watched none of them. She let their financiers speak. There was no cleansing this. No ceremony would dilute the stain. Her phone buzzed once. No caller ID, just a message. "How do you sleep?" She didn't respond. Instead, she walked to the supply room, opened a drawer that had once held riot gear, and found only vests marked Observer. They were new, untested, untouched by heat or panic. She picked one up, then put it down. Her team would ask questions, they always did, but for now, there was only the stillness before movement, the knowledge that when they arrived, they would look to her not for guidance, but for proof that it could still be earned. As she stepped outside, the light had changed, made sharper by wind and dust, and across the plaza, beneath the flaking banner that once read, "Serve and Protect," a man with a camera filmed in slow, deliberate motion, not for drama, but documentation. Someone had graffitied the word "Recept" on the building's exterior wall in block letters. Not vandalism, but the message. The hallway beyond her office had gone quiet after the third audit. No one announced arrivals anymore. They simply appeared, drifted, receded, like tides that knew the shore was no longer predictable. On her desk, the files did not pile, they waited. Each one was bound in a layer of dust from a system that had stopped breathing properly a long time ago. She opened them not for revelation, but for recognition, searching not for proof, but for the absences, the edges, the deletions disguised as decisions. She didn't smile when she picked up the new badge. She didn't frown, either. She simply studied it, letting its edges press against her palm, its weight a contrast to the one beside it. It wasn't heavier, but it meant more. This one came not with assumed power, but with earned oversight. A younger agent passed her doorway and paused. hesitant. "You keepin' both?" he asked. Her gaze didn't waver. "One reminds me how it started, the other reminds me never to forget." The agent nodded slowly, stepping back without further comment. On the wall behind her desk, etched into a framed canvas, were the words, "Silence is the privilege of the system. Action is the privilege of justice." She didn't look at the quote often. She didn't have to. It lived in every file she opened, every briefing she led, every case she allowed to be reopened. She didn't keep time in hours anymore. She marked it by disclosures, by footnotes, by redacted phrases, slowly returned to the light. The rhythm of accountability was not set by clocks, but by the tremble of a pen, deciding whether or not to finish a name. Outside, things continued to rupture. One news anchor, visibly shaking, resigned live on air after reading a segment on Bishop's internal case history. A mural of his face painted years ago on the West Precinct was overwritten in black, not erased but absorbed, a slow bleeding out of legacy. His old patrol car was found abandoned behind a warehouse, windows shattered, seatbelts cut. The department didn't claim it back. A group of artists turned it into a traveling exhibit, wheeling it through districts with a sign that read, "This used to be untouchable." A high school essay contest posted a banned topics list, and Bishop's name was at the top, not for safety, but for shame. She noticed these things not with vindication, but with a stillness that bordered on ritual. Every system resists correction, but only some do it with the violence of forgetting. Her role was to remember so others didn't have to bleed for it again. She reviewed a string of files marked incomplete. They weren't. They were interrupted, labeled insufficient, lacking basis, non-credible. But the language revealed more than the accusations ever did. They were dismissed not because they lacked evidence, but because the wrong person had signed the paperwork. One of those files had 4 names crossed out. The last one retyped in all caps, printed, with a smudged fingerprint that didn't match the case notes. She stared at it until her eyes dried. Then she signed it again. This time, it would hold. Down the hall, someone turned on the vending machine for the first time in 3 months. It groaned, old coils, reawakening. She listened without turning. Change didn't need eyes on it to arrive. It only needed persistence. The cameras in the ceiling didn't blink, but she'd long learned how to use their gaze to her advantage. She arranged boxes like teeth, each shelf a jawline of consequence. She rearranged them, not by year but by weight, the emotional tonnage of how long something was ignored. The cleaning crew no longer swept under her door. They knew not to disturb the dust there. She wanted the footprints of history visible, mapped, legible. There were no calendars on her wall, just maps of how systems failed, pinned with inked threads and 3-letter initials that once stood for silence. The name Bishop came up in review again, not by request, by pattern. Algorithms found connections that humans forgot. A badge number is tied to an evidence locker with missing contents. As witness relocated 3 times, never interviewed. A psychologist's report was edited after submission, and the signature was digitally copied. It wasn't one act. It was the echo of dozens, cascading into her hands. She didn't flinch. She annotated. On one printout, a name was smudged out and rewritten in ink. Hers. Not by her hand, by someone who had sent it anonymously. A warning. A benediction. Or both. She pressed it into a folder labeled Origin. She had a system for what to preserve and what to burn. She used neither lightly. A memo crossed her screen. A request for public comment. Denial of liability. Language vetted by 5 departments. She deleted it without reading past the subject line. This was not the office for denial. Her coffee remained untouched. The clock continued. The documents shifted under the weight of what they finally had to say. Underneath, someone else had etched dates, not hers. Others, too many. And in one of the reports on her desk, a name she recognized had been crossed out in red ink by an anonymous hand. Bishop. No rank, no title, just a name, voided like a debt too long uncollected. His phone number had been leaked online 2 weeks ago. No one claimed credit. No one had to. A bakery near his apartment stopped serving anyone who said his name. His niece, a middle schooler, was dropped from a private music program for administrative restructuring. On a commuter train, someone wore a shirt with his badge number crossed out in barbed wire print. There were no trials for these gestures, no statements issued, just fractures appearing where once silence ruled. She read through another file, a case dismissed in 2015, a complainant labeled incoherent. The internal note flagged, "Disregard, not politically viable." Her pen moved without hesitation. She redacted the flag, reopened the file. Her breath didn't hitch. She did not glance at the camera mounted overhead. She did not need validation. She needed a record. The badge gleamed again. Not loud, not bright, just precise. Outside, a new intern passed her door, slowed just enough to glance in. Their eyes met briefly, not in greeting, in comprehension. She nodded once. They moved on. The air felt held, not heavy. A list of precincts rotated on her screen. She tapped one, paused, then tapped another, paused again. It wasn't about intuition. It was about the pattern. The old badge caught a sliver of late light, glinting not with pride but with proof. She looked at it only once more before lowering her gaze. The desk had space for both. It would not be cleared, not yet, not ever. Now it would speak differently. Not as a weapon, not as a shield, but as a ledger, a record that said, everything from now on is being counted. She moved slowly, with the kind of steadiness that could only be earned through endurance. She ran a finger along the edge of the new badge, but didn't pick it up yet. There were things to arrange first. A set of names, a pending review, a security clearance that needed resetting, not because it had lapsed, but because she had changed categories. She wasn't enforcing anymore, she was overseeing. On her wall, mounted not in triumph, but as a daily confrontation, was a black canvas with 6 stark words. Silence is the privilege of the system. Action is the privilege of justice. She had written them during a sleepless night, not for publication, not for applause, but to remind herself that absence of noise is not presence of order. It's often just the result of muffled records and buried files. The headlines hadn't died, they had only shapeshifted, fed by the quiet fury of screens and inboxes. In one broadcast, a former sergeant who'd once shielded Bishop was caught on a hot mic referring to her office as that glorified complaint box, and within hours his address was projected onto the side of his precinct by protesters using tactical lasers. Elsewhere, a grainy video surfaced of Bishop attempting to enter a grocery store and being escorted out by a clerk wearing a body cam. The video, looped with slow-motion captions, crossed 1 million views before sunset. At a college campus in the South, an effigy of a badge-bearing Bishop's ID number was carried through the quad in complete silence, broken only by a single repeated phrase. "You made us memorize his name. Now you won't forget ours." Even his former police dog had been reassigned and retrained, officially for operational compatibility, but the implication was clear. Files slid into her inbox in unmarked folders. She opened each slowly, reading not just the contents but the metadata, the original timestamps, the document revisions, the hidden comments left behind like fingerprints on an erased surface. Some had names she recognized. Others were redacted with a kind of desperation, black bars applied not by legal mandate but by cowardice. She reopened each. There would be no hiding here. Her laptop chimed softly with a reminder. Internal review meeting in 20 minutes. She didn't move to attend. They would wait. The badges still lay untouched on the table. One in steel, the other in shadow. There were days she looked at the old one and felt nothing. There were days it anchored her spine. Across the hall, a light flickered. Maintenance had filed it as a recurring issue. She hadn't fixed it. She wanted it to pulse, a silent reminder that even buildings carry trauma. Morning in the building arrived not with light, but with sound. Filters humming through vents, the rhythmic thump of an archive drawer, the muted rasp of paper being pulled free from a file long untouched. Her office did not sleep. It stored glances, whispers, shadows, discrepancies. Outside, in the courtyard, someone had scrawled a quote with charcoal on concrete. "No system forgets unless it's taught to." It was erased before noon, but a photo had already gone viral. Over it, someone had superimposed the old emblem of Bishop's unit, the image bleeding at the edges like ink soaking through a confession. No caption needed. A podcast followed hours later, narrating his timeline with the rhythm of a true crime hymn, layering audio from street chants with policy briefings he'd once ignored. His home address trended for 5 straight hours. An order of service denial was leaked from a florist 2 blocks from his old precinct. On the 5th day, someone mailed an empty envelope to his lawyer containing only the clipped shoulder patch from his last uniform. No letter, just thread and silence. She moved through all of this without comment, her hands steady, her eyes precise. The map on her wall wasn't marked by cities, but by nodes of obstruction, cases stalled, names erased, badge numbers whose history had been filed under technical difficulty. She didn't pin those with tacks. She etched them in graphite, hard enough to scar the wall beneath the paint. Her assistant asked once if they should repaint. She shook her head. The wall was meant to bruise. In a downstairs hallway, someone left a sticker on the light switch. Evidence doesn't switch off. It was gone by the end of the day, but the glow it implied lingered. She met with her team only when necessary. The rest of the time, she left directives in the system. Initials, timestamps, cross-referenced page numbers. She didn't write summaries. She coded instructions into the very index. Language was structured. She trusted no sentence that could be twisted twice. Her predecessor had issued guidance in the form of open-ended questions. She issued hers as endpoints. Full stop. The badge she now carried remained clipped but never visible. It had no ceremony attached, only weight. It brushed against her side like a low percussion, constant and unignorable. She calibrated her movement to it. The phone rang only twice before being answered. There were no hold tones here. Nothing ambient. Everything had a purpose or was removed. Files marked previously as undetermined had been reassigned. They came back heavier. She treated them accordingly. The more redactions, the closer she read. The thinner the paper, the longer she held it. One report came on recycled stock, watermarked faintly with an outdated county seal. It smelled faintly of mildew and fire suppressant. She read it twice, then a third time, then reopened the system and flagged a name that had gone untouched for 9 years. In the side column of the database, someone had left a note in gray text, "Let sleeping dogs lie." She deleted it before finishing the sentence. The window behind her was coated in non-reflective film. She didn't need to see herself. She needed to see through. A crow once hit the glass and left a shadow of feathers that didn't fade. She requested that no one clean it. It remained in the corner like punctuation. Her inbox grew, not in volume, but in voltage. Each message now came not with urgency, but with intent. Language sharpened. Statements that once began with "if" now begin with "when." Clerical staff began using thicker pens. Signatures deepened. The sound of the pen pressing into paper had changed. It clicked harder. An analyst reported a pattern of symbols found in field notes from 4 precincts. She didn't ask what they meant. She drew them in ink across her left wrist and kept them there for a week. When a delivery failed to arrive, no one asked twice. The vendor had learned. After one misstep, they stopped printing labels with the word compliance. Her office preferred alignment. In a narrow stairwell, someone had written the word director in chalk. It was gone before she saw it. But a photograph was emailed anonymously. No subject, just the word, just the stone. She had it printed and pinned under the light switch at ankle level. Enough to trip over, enough to notice. The floor plan of the office had changed subtly. The desks moved half an inch. Chairs are reoriented toward doors, not windows. People read, facing each other. She had ordered nothing. They had changed on their own. The air vent in her office made a soft clicking sound every 33 minutes. No one could trace it. She timed her deep breathing to it. Her staff began asking fewer questions. They delivered more outcomes. She redlined a paragraph from an interoffice draft and wrote, "No metaphors. Say what happened." The draft returned blank. She approved it anyway. Her hand ached less these days. Her name was spoken more quietly, not from fear but from recognition. as though volume might fracture what had finally become solid, that even infrastructure remembers. Her coffee sat cold, forgotten, beside a yellowed report. She didn't sip it. She hadn't planned to. A pen rolled across the desk, slow, deliberate, without interruption. Somewhere in the building, an elevator pinged and didn't open. She'd learned to track sound patterns since moving in, distinguishing the click of a heel from the drag of a reluctant step. Surveillance footage played on mute behind her. She didn't glance at it. She trusted its presence more than its clarity. Her desk was unadorned save for a single photograph, face turned downward, time-stamped blurred, but the background unmistakable. The bench, the tree, the burst of light through early summer leaves. She didn't face the window anymore. She'd preferred internal walls. She'd asked for the blinds to be removed entirely. Transparency was not a concept here. It was a condition. Her ID badge now held a strip of coded blue not found in any public directory. She didn't ask what it meant. She already knew. The hallway outside her door had been freshly painted 3 times in 4 months. Vandalism, they said. Remembrance, she corrected in her head. She allowed each layer to settle before requesting another. Memory required layering. Her new role was carved in bureaucratic language, full of passive voice and impossible mandates. She translated each line silently as she read it. Monitor became investigate. Recommend became demand. Discretion became intervention. She did not write memos. She wrote orders. Her staff referred to her simply as director. She never corrected them. She did not need to speak what was already evident in tone and pace. Her schedule was blocked in shades of gray, not for secrecy but for consistency. No one needed to know the details. They only needed to know that time was now structured around consequences. She crossed off names not to erase them, but to record where the light no longer reached. She had no signature. She signed documents with initials and time codes. Her handwriting had evolved into a script designed for scans and subpoenas. Her thoughts aligned in numbered lists, but she never shared them. Her thoughts belonged only to the ledger. This office would be none of those things. A knock at the door didn't interrupt her. It simply marked the next step. A junior agent, no older than 27, stood there, holding a tablet and trying not to look too long at the twin badges. "Ma'am," he said, voice crisp but low, "your official seal is ready, and the authorization code for the team has been updated." She nodded, motioned for him to come in. He placed the tablet gently on the edge of her desk, then hesitated. His eyes lingered on the badges before he asked, softly, "Are you going to keep both?" Her eyes flicked from him to the desk, then back. "One reminds me where I began. The other reminds me of what must never be allowed to repeat." The young agent didn't press further. He didn't need to. The answer sat between the 2 pieces of metal, in the space carved by both pain and purpose. Throughout the morning, messages poured in. Some from district commanders, others from civil rights attorneys, a few from victims she had never met. One simply read, "Thank you for not vanishing." She read each line, not as praise, but as a reminder. The badge wasn't a reward, it was a receipt. Proof of what had been endured, yes, but also what remained unfinished. Midday, she gathered her new team. 4 agents, 2 analysts, and 1 systems auditor. All had been selected for one reason. None of them were afraid of the process. They knew the work would be slow, not because it lacked urgency, but because it demanded precision. She stood before them, not behind a podium, not with a slide deck, just her, a notepad, and the 2 badges in her coat pocket. "We're not here to clean," she said. "We're here to account. Every call missed, every log was altered, every silence was signed off on. We're here to record what happened and ensure what happens next doesn't come without eyes on it." No one clapped. That wasn't the culture here. This wasn't about performance. It was about architecture, building a structure sturdy enough to withstand the next attempt to shake it. She returned to her desk. The old badge remained in its case, no longer tarnished but preserved exactly as it had been, because history shouldn't be edited for clarity. The new badge, however, now lay in her palm. Its edges were sharper, its number longer, its access deeper. She tucked it into her chest pocket, not to wear it, but to carry it. That evening, the last thing she did before shutting off the lights was place the two badges side by side again. Not aligned, not mirrored, but balanced, one dented, one pristine. Together they told a story that no press release could ever summarize.